Perfect. All right. Hi, I just want to welcome everyone to our event tonight, our webinar. My name is Jen. I'm just going to do a quick introduction to our speaker, Claire Smith. So Claire Smith is a professional genealogist with more than 20 years of experience in research, teaching, and lecturing. Her extensive research experience spans New England, Ireland, Atlantic Canada, England, and the West Indies, including both traditional and DNA research. A former high-tech executive, Claire applies her technology skills to optimize her research, continually applying new tools and innovative methodologies to her genealogy research. Claire is currently a mentor for the National Genealogical Society's Advanced Skills Program and formerly the director, seminar program chair for the Massachusetts Genealogical Council. She's a graduate of the ProGen Professional Genealogy Study Group and holds certificates in genealogical research from Boston University and in genealogy and family history from the University of Washington. Tonight, she will show you how to piece together clues about family identities by comparing and correlating information from a variety of sources. So I'm just going to say, take it away, Claire. Thanks so much for coming, everyone.
Thanks, Jen. Nice introduction. Hi, everybody. It's great to be back at the Chelmsford Library. Thank you all for coming tonight. So tonight I'm going to be sharing a simple case study about a problem I ran into with my own family. The talk is called Piecing It Together, Discovering a Family Secret, because I uncovered something that I didn't expect when I tried to make these puzzle pieces fit together when they didn't seem to. So I'm going to walk through how I piece together the information from a variety of different sources to provide evidence of identity using different collections of Massachusetts state, city, and church records to put this puzzle together. It could be anywhere, though. It just happens to be in Massachusetts. The big thing I want to show you is how to use different record sets together to figure out the answer to your problem. So this problem started when I was just cleaning up my own family tree, making sure I had copies of all the records, just checking all the boxes. You know how you work on your own tree and some of the things you put off. Well, there were some of those, and I was filling in all those gaps. And during this process, I uncovered this really amazing secret that had been buried for more than 100 years. Not what I was expecting, but that's the way it is with researching your family. So meet the Richards family. This is Albert Richards and his wife, Mary Murphy. These are my grandparents. And I discovered when I was doing my house cleaning that I'd never bothered to get a copy of their marriage record. Really? Yep, apparently. So little did I know that just trying to get this record would take me down a deep, deep rabbit hole. So I had the year of their marriage. I wasn't sure where they got married, probably Boston, because that's where they lived. But I wasn't entirely sure, and I needed to track down that record. I'd gotten their parents, parents, everybody but them, my own grandparents. Shameful, because you should start with what you know. So I was living on the West Coast for 16 years, and it was always on my list to track it down when I visited, and it never quite made it to the top of my list. And it occurred to me that by now it would probably be online. So back to the Richards family, where were we? So I had the year of their marriage, and I thought they were probably married in Boston, but I wasn't sure. And I needed to just track down that record. So I started looking for the marriage record at the Massachusetts Archives website. They have a really great digital records page and an extensive collection of online records. And I thought that starting at the state level made sense since I wasn't entirely sure that they married in Boston. And I knew their marriage year in 1918, which I'd gotten from my mother. And you'd think she'd know her parents or her grandparents. No, this is her parents' marriage year. You'd think she'd know. Okay, so I clicked on the link for births, marriages, and deaths, 1916 to 1920. And it took me to Family Search. So Family Search, as you may know, has partnered with lots of research institutions, including the Massachusetts Archives. And they've digitized many of their records, and that's great. So I tried to search with my grandfather's name, Albert Richards, who I was told was born in 1890. And I didn't specify a place because I didn't know where they married. And I chose Albert Richards for my search because his wife was named Mary Murphy. And you can imagine how many Murphys were in Boston in the early 1900s. That's just, I didn't want to spend a week on this. I wanted to spend an hour maybe. And Murphy's almost as bad as Smith, and I have both in my tree. Oh, well. So here's what I found. This is the marriage record for Albert W. Richards and Mary A. Murphy. And it was recorded in the city of Lowell. And if you look at the top of the page, you'll notice that printed here is the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, not the city of Lowell. And that means that this is the state copy of the record. And that makes sense since I was searching at the state archives. So in this case, the Lowell city clerk would have copied the original marriage record, probably by hand, and this is handwritten, and sent it to the state. So here's a tip. Always find out why and how, or how and why the records were created in the place and time you're researching. If you know the process, it'll help you make sense of the records. Okay, so in Massachusetts, vital events, by that I mean births, marriages, and deaths, were and are still recorded by the town or city clerk where the event took place. So in this case, it took place in Lowell, so the Lowell city clerk would have done this. So starting in 1841, cities and towns were required to report these records to the state once a year. So that meant that some poor clerk would have to sit there and transcribe all the records for that year, often copying them by hand, and then send those copies to the state. So that's what I would be looking at the state archives. So there'd be an original copy in the town or city clerk's office, and a copy of that record at the state archives or wherever they kept it. So I'm looking at the state copy. And remember, anytime a record is copied, errors can be made or information might be left out. Did they copy everything? Could they have mistranscribed a date or a name? If it was me doing the transcription, certainly it could have been mistranscribed. Have you ever inverted two numbers or missed a word? Happens all the time. So the people listed in this record certainly appear to be my grandparents. Their ages are right, their parents' names are right. Mary's birthplace, Everett. That's right. They all match what I know about my family. But since I know this record is not the original, it's the state copy, I also know that it might not be completely accurate, and it might not have all the detail from the original record. But according to this record, Albert W. and Mary A. married in Lowell. And my head was spinning at this point. As far as I knew, my grandmother, Mary, never left Boston, never talked about living anywhere else or getting married somewhere else. And what was she doing getting married 25 miles away? Also, they were married by a justice of the peace. I would have expected my grandmother, who was a devout Catholic, to marry in a church and to marry a Roman Catholic. What is she doing getting married to Albert in Lowell? Was Albert not Catholic? This is getting interesting. So it also says that she was living in Haverhill. Haverhill? Even further from Boston, and her occupation was housework. What? This is all new to me. I'm sure my mother didn't know about this, but she wasn't around to ask. So Haverhill is 35 miles from Boston. So I was really confused and intrigued. So something else was wrong too. The dates didn't make sense. I thought that Albert and Mary's first child, William Malachi, was born in 1916, but they married in 1918. And that date, his birth date, was written in my grandmother's date book. Did his parents really marry 2 years later? So for the rest of this talk, I'm going to be calling William, who's my uncle and my research subject, I'm going to be calling him Bill, because there'll be other Williams I'll be looking at who could be Bill, but it's not clear. So the real deal, the real Bill is Bill. Anybody named William could be someone else, or I'm not sure. So Bill is the real deal. That's all you need to think about. Okay, So why could these dates be wrong? Well, maybe I grabbed the wrong couple. Maybe this William, Albert, and Mary really isn't my grandparents, but really, they're the right age. The parents' names are these really look like my grandparents. Their parents' marriage date, their marriage date could be incorrect. It could be wrong in the record. Anything can be mistranscribed, and remember, this isn't the original. Or maybe I have the wrong birth date for Bill. Maybe I wrote it down wrong after I asked my mother. We don't know, so let's look a little further. So I have two research questions. I'm starting to suspect that Bill might have been a bastard. Was my uncle born out of wedlock? That would be complete shock. But he was born 2 years before his parents' marriage, if I have my dates right, and maybe I don't. And if he was born out of wedlock, who was his father? This is very interesting. Did Mary marry because she had to? That low marriage to a non-Catholic makes sense if Bill was born out of wedlock. So was his father Albert, or was it someone else? So this quick little search for a record is turning into a big rat hole, but I was bound and determined to figure this out. So I decided to start over and look at all the evidence I already had. And before we move on, I want to point something out about Massachusetts records. On the left, we have that record from Lowell that we just looked at, where Albert and Mary married. And on the right, we have the same marriage record, but from the city of Haverhill, where the bride lived at the time she married. And I found it by looking in the index book, and I'll get into that in a minute. In Massachusetts, marriages are usually recorded in the cities or towns where both the bride and groom lived at the time they married. And if they married somewhere else, it's also recorded there. So there could be up to 3 different versions of the same record. And in this case, since Albert lived in Boston, Mary lived in Haverhill, and what was she doing there anyway? And they married in Lowell, there could be 3 copies. But I didn't find a third marriage record in Boston as I expected. There were only 2 entries listed in the marriage index for an Albert W. Richards who married in 1918. Come on. Okay. So notice that there's a little bit more information in the Lowell certificate. It lists the bride and groom's street addresses at the time of their marriage, not just the towns they lived in, which is the other record here. So this could be really useful. Now I could find out who else was living with them or right next door. I could grow my list of fans, those family, associates, and neighbors who could help me in revealing more about my grandmother's secret story, if there is one. So if this was an out of wedlock birth, maybe she had a co-conspirator. Maybe she was living with a family member in Haverhill when she went to stay there to have the baby. I'm beginning to think that that's what happened. So always look at all copies of the record because there may be more details on one copy that aren't on the other, as in this case. And notice that the marriage date for both records is the 14th of September in 1918. But these records are derivative and they're from the same source. So it's not really a coincidence that they agree. Fruit from the same tree, September 14th, 1918. Okay. And I did eventually find Albert and Mary's marriage license from the city of Boston, where Albert lived. It was in a different database called Massachusetts Marriages, 1841 to 1915, on Family Search. So more digitized records from the Massachusetts archives. And this is the marriage license filed in Boston on September 7th, a week before they married. So the marriage information was filled in later by the Lowell city clerk after the marriage, and then this record was sent back to the Boston city registrar. So Boston did indeed have a copy of the record after all, but it was in a completely different record set, not where I expected it. So as you can see, the information for the marriage is consistent with the other records we just looked at, same date, same place. And you'll notice, you know how on microfilm you can scroll back to the beginning of the film to see more information about the records? Well, you can do this with online records too.
Claire, sorry, I just want to quickly interrupt. I finally found that document. I just uploaded it, so it's all set in the chat.
Okay,
All
so
set.
everybody, you can grab a copy of the handout in the chat.
All right, thanks so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So when I paged back to the beginning of the book and went forward a few images, I found the title page, or I found the spine and the title of the book on the spine. And it's Marriages number 1001 through 1500 for 1918. And it says Out of Town. So this is a Boston marriages book for out of town records. And that's why that record was in a different record set. So this is part of that collection of archives records from city and town clerks at the Massachusetts Archives. I also found this very same record on Find My Past in their United States Marriages database. And you can find links to both of those record sets in the syllabus. So at this point, I'd found 3 different records of Albert and Mary's marriage, but I still hadn't found the actual original record. And it was time to track it down because I wanted to find out if that date was actually correct. So I called the city of Lowell to find out how to get a copy of the original record, and their website only described how to get a certified copy. And that's what this is that you're seeing on the screen. So a certified record is created when the clerk transcribes the original record, definitely not optimal for genealogy research. So the person I talked to at the clerk's office was not willing to let me see the original record. And I offered to come in person, but the answer was still no. She was pretty grumpy. She was probably really busy and didn't want to deal with a genealogist. They were only willing to provide me with a certified copy. But since they would be creating it from the original record, I figured it was. So I finally coughed up the money and got the transcribed copy of the record. And guess what? The date was exactly the same. So the original record is probably that they married in 1918, 2 years after their son was born. So by now I was pretty reasonably sure I had the correct marriage date and the correct birth date. So it's not looking good for Bill. It looks like he was indeed a bastard. And you may be wondering if I checked newspapers for their marriage and the birth, and I did, but I found nothing. But if my cover-up theory was correct, they wouldn't have reported this shotgun wedding or this bastard birth in the paper, probably. Okay, so we've ruled out 2 of the possible reasons for conflicting dates, and we're left with only one, that Bill's birth date is incorrect, and I need that original birth record, right? So I didn't have it, and I didn't have a way to get it. So it was time to analyze the records I did have that gave me baby Bill's birth date. I was still holding hope for that 1916 date being in error, and maybe he was born in 1919, the year after his parents married. So what did I have? I had a list of, this is a list of records I had with his date or birth date or birth year on it, from which I could calculate his birth date. So I had his mother's diary, and she certainly would have known the date, and she listed 1916. I had the Massachusetts Birth Index, but it's only an index, and I didn't see the original record. I have his Social Security Death Index, again, only an index, and I need to see the original. His World War II draft card. Now that's direct evidence. Bill himself filled this out, and he believed he was born in 1916 on June 4th. And finally, I have his obituary, which listed his age as 64 when he died on the 29th of December in 1980. So I can calculate his year of birth as 1916. So every single record is consistent that Bill was born in 1916. I had found no conflicts. I still needed that original record, though. Okay, so let's stop for a moment and talk about where you get vital records in Massachusetts. Remember, the city or town clerk is the keeper of the original? And some town clerks actually will let you come in and look at the records and touch the records and even make copies. Others might just give you that certified copy option. But for the state copy of a record, you go to the Mass Archives for any record up to 1930. More recent records Anything created within the last 90 years are considered to be active and are still at the Massachusetts Registry of Vital Statistics at Columbia Point. But it takes them a couple of years to move those records over from Columbia Point, or from the Columbia Point to the Mass Archives when they age out. So sometime after the records turn 90 years old, they get transitioned. And they send them in big batches. And if they're short of staff or there's a pandemic, things slow down significantly, and you can understand that. So let's go back to Bill's birth record. So I didn't know for sure where Bill was born, but I thought it was probably Boston, since Albert and Mary's next child was born there and they lived there for their entire marriage. So I thought the Boston City Clerk's office was a reasonable starting point, but I wanted to line up my ducks. So I went to the website before I gave them a call. And on their website, they had lots of information on how to get the records. And they mentioned there were instructions for ordering certified copies of the record, but I wanted to see the original image. Maybe I could go in there and they'd let me see it. So I read through the instructions carefully for ordering the birth certificate, and I noticed this. If the parents weren't married when the baby was born, the birth certificate becomes restricted. What does that mean? Only those listed on a restricted record can request it. But since Bill was born more than 100 years ago, anyone listed on the record is almost certainly dead by now. So that doesn't help me. So I didn't know with absolute certainty that Bill had been born out of wedlock, though. So I decided to take a chance and call the Boston City Clerk's office and ask how I could obtain a copy of my deceased uncle's 1916 birth record, not even mentioning that I thought he might have been born a bastard. And they told me that the record was restricted and reiterated the same information that I found on the website. So I asked if Bill's children might be able to get his birth record, and they said no. How crazy is that? No one can get this birth record. But this is Massachusetts state law, and the lawmakers, when they enacted it, weren't thinking about genealogists 100 years later. So I'll only be able to get this record if and when the law changes. How likely is that? There's actually a group trying to make this happen. But I had to find other evidence of Bill's birth. So what else could I find online? So before jumping straight into the records and taking pot shots in the dark, doing searches, as is so very tempting, I decided to take a look at the index, the paper index that had been digitized, to see if Bill's birth record even exists in Massachusetts. I know that this exists because I've looked at it at the New England Historic Genealogical Society. It's an index of births for each year, and you can flip through it, and it's in alphabetical order by surname. So I could just look up Richards or Murphy and find out where Bill was born. So he'd be in this statewide index, and it would list his name and tell me what town he was born in. So wouldn't that be nice? And then I could go to that town and get the record. So this is how the world worked before we went digital. Remember encyclopedias? It's always a good idea to check the index. So I clicked on the Mass Archives index to births and marriages and deaths, 1841 to 1971. It's a similar record set of the same index is also on Ancestry. It has a slightly different name. It's called the Massachusetts Birth Index from 1860 to 1970. And that one is searchable. Links to both of these are in your syllabus, of course. So clicking on the link brought me to Family Search, of course, and scrolling down the page and clicking, I found these two record sets that were worth looking at. Remember that Bill could have been born a Richards, or if he was born a bastard, he would have been born a Murphy. Oh no, Murphy. You can imagine, like, this is like a needle in the haystack. That name was so common in a big city like Boston. So I really wanted to look at the digitized microfilms of the indexes to births in 1916 for both of these, and to see if Bill's original birth record was there. And if I could find it on the Murphy surname, or either surname before it had been amended, I might be in luck. But I needed to check both of these record sets. So here we go. I went first for the low-hanging fruit, the index for Richard's births, because there'd be far, far fewer. And as you can see, this index is organized in alphabetical order by surname. And it and then by first name. Each entry lists the town where the birth was recorded, the year it took place, and the volume and page number where the actual record can be found. So here we're looking at the page at the end of the Richards listings, and there's a William down here, and it's just a double quote for ditto for Richards surname. And let's see, and it's William Malachi Richards, and that is indeed my uncle's middle name, and born in Boston in 1916, and that's consistent with all of the other records. And it says that his birth record is in volume 206, page 91. And if I point out this little asterisk right here, what does the asterisk mean? Well, I'm thinking it means that it was an amended, but I couldn't just assume, as tempting as it was. This little side trip was taking me way too much of my time, and I was getting quite annoyed by now. But I went back to the beginning of the first volume of the record set to see if there was a key or something to tell me what the asterisk meant, but there wasn't. So I contacted the Mass Archives, and they are great. Their archivists are really wonderful and helpful, as most archivists are, and found out that the asterisk indicates that the record is indeed amended. Maybe because Bill would originally have been named Murphy, I thought. So if there's a Richards record, that would be an updated or an amended record. And volume 206 contains records before 1925, the archivist told me. And they only had records after 1925 at this point. And this record is newer and hasn't been moved to the archives yet. And they were a bit behind moving records over because of the pandemic. So I'd have to go to the Registry of Vital Records and Statistics to get it. And this was during COVID lockdown, and they were closed. I talked to the archivist and asked why a record might be amended, and she said it was usually due to a name change or an adoption. And that means it's a restricted record, and I couldn't get a copy, of course, or quite annoying. But here's the first page of the book listing all of the William Murphys born in Massachusetts between 1816 and 1916 and 1920, excuse me. And there were several born in Boston in 1916, underlined in red here, but none of them had the middle name Malachi or a middle initial M. So I have no way to know if they might be my uncle. I would have to order the original records to find out who the parents were, to see if either was Albert and Mary, Bill's known parents. I also found 3 entire pages of matches of Murphy babies with no first names, some of whom might have been born in Boston in 1916. None in Everett, though, where Mary lived previously with her family. Or Haverhill, where she was living when she married. Any of these matches could be my Uncle Bill, and ordering all of them records at $10 a whack, I think that's what it cost, could become very expensive, but maybe I could find the record I was looking for online. I'm always trying to outsmart the system. So I went back to the Mass Archives site to look for Bill's 1916 birth record. In that collection, Births, Marriages, and Deaths, 1916 to 1920, I'd looked there before, but was I really careful? Maybe I missed something. I needed to take a careful look. I'm sure I did not do my due diligence with hundreds and hundreds of Murphys. It's a painful but necessary process. So clicking took me back to, guess again, Family Search, where their digitized records are. So before I clicked on search, I thought I need to read through how to use this collection. It seems kind of obvious to read the instructions, but how often do we skip this step? I'm sure we do it a lot. So with this record set, there was a known issues section in the Read More. And it mentioned that the town of Marblehead is incorrectly listed as Bleehead. They left out the MAR. So if I'd been researching in Marblehead, that would be a critical piece of information. So it's always a good idea to slow down and pay attention and remember to read the instructions. Also, remember, whenever you see on Family Search that any record set has a browse button, that means it's not yet fully indexed. So even though you can search because it's partially indexed, your people might not be in the index yet. So it's always worth browsing through the records manually to find out if they're there, even if you can't find them with a search. And as you know, even if records are indexed fully, they might not have gotten it quite right because it's hard to transcribe a record that's has poor handwriting or is faded or damaged. So it's always worth looking through on your own. In this case, the search function didn't yield me any results, and I tried everything. I tried William Richards, William Murphy, born in 1916. I tried searching by either and both parents. I tried flipping the surname and the first name. I searched for the parents individually, or just for the father, just for the mother. Nothing. And next, I searched only using last names, and I found 174 Richards and 490 Murphy births in Suffolk County in 1916, as well as 4 Murphys, but no Richards in the town of Everett. So the next step was to go through these records carefully and see if anything looked at all plausible. And if that didn't yield results, I'd need to widen my search to other counties, starting with the adjacent counties. A painstaking but necessary process. And at this point, I was saying, is this really worth it? Ugh. But I wouldn't know unless I tried, and I really wanted to know what my grandmother was up to. Okay, so if you click on the Browse button, here's what you see. And you can go right to the city or town that you're looking for and click and look at that record set. So it's not really that hard. So I thought it hit gold when I saw the amended births listed here. Aren't these records restricted, and how could they possibly be online? But they only go up to 1920. And remember, Bill's birth record could have been amended at any point before 1925. I did look through them though. No Bill. So there are the amendments in births up to 1920. So maybe I can find the original Murphy birth record before it was amended. So there are 2 volumes of births in Boston for 1916, so I thought I'd take a look. And here it is. I started with the first volume, and you can see that it's volume 1, and I started browsing the records. So this looks almost like an index, but it's with 1 entry on each line, and if you look closely, you can see that it isn't. It's a register book, and 1 birth is recorded across the entire line over 2 pages. And it lists all the usual information: the date of birth, the full name of the child, in color if other than white, sex, names of both parents, physician, place of birth, residence of the parents, occupation of the father, birthplace of the father, birthplace of the mother, and the date of the record. And the last column repeats the entry number so you can make sure you're on the same line. If the page, which is really good if the facing pages aren't quite lined up, as in this case. So when I looked through the first volume, I scanned the first few pages and I saw how the records were organized in roughly in chronological order. And Bill was born on June 4th, so I paged forward until I started seeing June records, and most of them were together, and a few were mixed into May and July, and I checked them all. And I checked the end of the book to see if he was in last minute edition, and I did not find any records for a Richards with a first name William, Will, initial W, WM, Bill, or a first name starting with Mal for Malachi, his middle name, despite his being listed in the index we saw previously. Isn't that curious? I also did not find a male Murphy born to Mary Murphy in Everett or Boston. Only 1 entry got my attention, and I wasn't at all sure about it, but let's take a peek. And we'll zoom in. So this one's really interesting. Let's see. Okay. Number 8342 is a birth on June 4th, Uncle Bill's birthday, for an unnamed, indicated by that hyphen, Murphy, a male, to mother Marion Murphy. Not Mary. No fathers listed. At St. Mary's Hospital. Residence of the parents unknown. Birthplace of the father ditto for unknown. Birthplace of mother Everett. That is where Mary was born, and this baby was born on Bill's birthday. Is that a coincidence? I mean, there were zillions and zillions of Murphys, even in Everett. And I'd never heard of St. Mary's Hospital in Boston. Okay, so if you look a little bit more closely, click right there, it says corrected in pencil above the entry number. It's getting more interesting. There were thousands of Murphys in and around Boston at this time, so I wasn't convinced that this was really the right family. Could another male Murphy with a mother from Everett have been born on the same day as Bill? Well, maybe. But could Mary be Mary? Maybe she was hiding with a slightly different name. So I saved that record to my working directory and recorded it in my research log. But there's a ton of information from this record that I have to follow up on. So I updated my plan, and I needed to find out when and why this record was corrected, and I needed to find out what St. Mary's Hospital was and whether it had records. So I called them, and the person I spoke to didn't really want to know. And I called back on a different day and time, spoke to somebody else who was even less helpful. So it was time for a different plan. If Marion is my grandmother Mary, I knew there had to be a baptism because she was pretty much a rabid Catholic. She believed in heaven, hell, and limbo, and there was no way her baby was not going to get baptized because she believed that if something happened, that baby would be in limbo. And so I mapped all the locations of the Catholic churches nearest Mary's home in Everett, where she lived with her dad and brother, and those nearest the hospital where Marion's baby was born. And then I looked for the records. The Archdiocese of Boston Archives and American Ancestors had worked on a project to digitize these records for a couple of years. So I started there. And I went through a lot of records in their database, browsing records for those churches closest to Mary in Boston and Everett, and nothing. At this point, I was ready to give up. It seemed hopeless, but I still wanted this record. But I put it aside for a while. And as I was talking to a friend about this, a genealogy friend, of course, she was egging me on here, and I decided to find out more about St. Mary's. And actually, she looked it up on the web and said to me, this was a home for unwed mothers. And I thought, oh, good God, how did I miss that? The Boston City Directory of 1916, when Bill was born, showed St. Mary's Infant Asylum and Lying-in Hospital. And if you look in the dictionary, Merriam-Webster lists lying-in as the state of attending and consequent to childbirth. So that is very interesting indeed. And if you look at the website for St. Mary's Hospital, you find out that it was an infant asylum for infants and their unwed mothers. That's the clincher. If Mary is Marion, who gave birth to unnamed male baby Murphy on June 4th, 1916 at St. Mary's, she was indeed an unwed mother. Maybe she did use another name to keep her secret. The website even has photos. So I got an idea of what it might have been like for my grandmother while she was there. Isn't this an ominous looking building? I also found this article dated just a year before baby Bill's birth in the Catholic newspaper, Sacred Heart Review. The sisters running the infant asylum were looking for good homes with a view to adoption for homeless infants received from birth to 3 years of age, and would even pay $10 monthly and provide medical care. So how does an unwed mother in that day and age possibly keep her child? The stigma was just unacceptable. It wasn't done. It was a very different time with different values, and I was becoming very sad just to think that my grandmother might have been that person and hiding the birth of her son in shame, having to do that. But wait, St. Mary's was a Catholic hospital. Maybe the baby was baptized there. I'd already talked to them though, and they were not helpful. And then it occurred to me. I woke up one morning and went, why don't I talk to the Archdiocese of Boston Archives? What am I thinking? They might know where the baptism records are for the hospital. So This is the Archdiocese of Boston website, and I emailed them explaining the situation, that I was looking for a baptism shortly after September 4th, 1916, for a baby born in St. Mary's Hospital to Mother Marian or Mary Murphy. And I hit the jackpot. The archives had the baptism book for St. Mary's, and they were able to send me a scanned copy of the baptism record within a few days. So if you don't find the record you're looking for online, you can visit or email the Archdiocese of Boston Archives in Braintree. Just remember, the record you're looking for may not be online. Pick up the phone, send an email. Anyway, I found them to be very helpful. But they asked me for a donation after the fact, which was fine. I was happy to give them one. This was wonderful information. So here's the record. They wouldn't send me the whole page or any other information, just the entry. I have since visited the archives and seen it and photographed it. But here's what I got. The baby was baptized Malachi, not William. That's Bill's middle name, remember, and his mother was Mary Murphy. That's Bill's mother. And his birth date is the same, June 4th, 1916. The sponsor was a lady named Bertha Hayes, likely someone who worked at the hospital. I've never seen her in any record concerning the family. So is Malachi Murphy the same person as my grandmother Mary's son, William Malachi Richards? I certainly think so at this point. I think I might have hit an extra, yeah. No. So here's what we have for evidence at this point. Multiple records list the 4th of June, 1916 as the birth date of William Malachi Richards. My Uncle Bill lists his place as Boston and his mother as Mary Agnes Murphy. I was not able to obtain his original birth certificate, though, because of the amended records being restricted. Secondly, a birth record shows an unnamed male Murphy, born on the very same day, to Mother Marian Murphy at St. Mary's Hospital in Boston. Marian was born in Everett, where my grandmother was born. Third piece of information, a baptism record lists the birth date of Malachi Murphy, whose mother was Mary Murphy. Malachi was born on the same date in the very same hospital, St. Mary's in Boston. Mary, like Marian, was born in Everett. These have to be the same people, right? Let's put it together. Let's compare and correlate the evidence. William Malachi Richards, who is our subject Bill, and Malachi Murphy have the same birth date, 4th of June, 1916. Secondly, the two share the same unusual name, Malachi, one as his middle and the other as his first name. Likely not a coincidence. The spelling's slightly different, but that's okay. One has a Y, the other has an I. I would guess that a lot of people probably didn't know how to spell the name Malachi, though. This was probably just a clerical error. They were both born in Boston. Both have their mothers listed as Mary Murphy. It seems almost certain that William Malachi Richards was born Malachi Murphy, and that they are indeed the same person. So William Malachi Richards, baby Murphy, and William Murphy, or Malachi Murphy, are likely the same person. Malachi Murphy shares the same birth date, June 4th, 1916, with unnamed baby Murphy, and both were born in the same hospital, St. Mary's in Boston. There's a minor discrepancy in the names of the mothers. One is Mary and the other Mary. But I have found no other records for a matching Malachi Murphy born in and around Boston. I've also hadn't found any records of anyone named Marian Murphy in Everett. There are two pieces of conflicting evidence which can easily be explained, and I found it's almost certain that nameless baby Murphy and Malachi Murphy are indeed the same person. And that would make their mothers, Mary Murphy and Marian Murphy, also the same person. And I've already shown you that William Malachi Richards is Malachi Murphy. So if Malachi is unnamed baby Murphy, then all three, William Malachi Richards, also known as Bill, unnamed baby Murphy, and Malachi Murphy are all indeed the same person. Whew. I found, is there any other scenario other than Bill having been born out of wedlock that makes sense? I haven't come up with one yet, and if you do, I would love to hear it. Good genealogists always allow for the possibility of being wrong. It's always fun to try to break your own hypothesis. Always try to prove yourself wrong. Okay, we're almost to the end here. So before wrapping up this project, I wanted to review everything one more time. I use timelines a lot and find them a helpful tool for sorting through, comparing, and correlating evidence. If I look at all the data for Bill's birth in a timeline, my hypothesis makes sense. Bill was born out of wedlock and named Malachi Murphy. Bill's parents married in 1918, more than 2 years after his birth. At this time, Mary was living in Haverhill, 35 miles outside of Boston, perhaps to hide her status as an unmarried mother. Mary only moved back to Boston after her marriage to Albert, and she got to keep her son. So here's the Richards family in the 1920 census. Let's take a closer look. The census showed Albert, Mary, and their 2 sons, William, aged 3.5, consistent with that 1916 birth, and Albert, aged 11/12, so 11 months old. William's relationship to the head of household, Albert, is explicitly listed as son, but it would be, wouldn't it? We don't know who the informant was, though. His middle initial is wrong. It's not C. It's M for Malachi, the same as his younger brother's middle initial of C. So maybe the census taker made a mistake. There's another mistake, too. Albert's younger brother, or sorry, Bill's younger brother, Albert, is listed as female in the census, and he was not a female. So, and at some point before 1925, Bill's name was officially changed from Malachi Murphy to William Malachi Richards. And that is how Bill identified himself for the rest of his life. Now I knew that Albert W. Richards is Bill's father of record and that Bill was raised in Albert and Mary's household. His marriage and death records list his father as Albert Richards. But is Bill Albert's biological father? I do have one more tool that I have not yet shown you. Does DNA support my hypothesis? Bill and my mother were siblings. Bill's son, Mal, my first cousin, agreed to take a DNA test so I could compare his results with mine. Mal and I match at 587 centimorgans. That's an autosomal test, of course. And what exactly does that mean? If we look at the Shared Centimorgan Project, genealogist Blaine Bettinger collected all the DNA match information from thousands and thousands of people who've taken autosomal tests. And he compared their known relationships with their DNA test results and used that data to predict the likelihood of possible relationships. What time is it? Okay. I am almost done. And Johnny Pearl automated this information and put together an interactive tool on his DNA Painter site. And it's free for anyone to use. So I would urge you, if you're using DNA, to avail yourself of that. Anyway, this 587 centimorgan match that my cousin Bill and I have, it could mean that we're of the same generation. So these are the two possible relationships. And we're either half first cousins or second cousins. So we don't know for sure if Albert is Bill's father. However, in addition to autosomal DNA, Bill took a Y-DNA test, and one male Richards cousin did turn up. The other Y-DNA matches were all named Nason or Mason. And apparently the Richards cousin claims that his ancestor was kidnapped by Indians in Berwick, Maine in the 1680s and was kidnapped. And the name was eventually changed to Richaud. The first name was flipped to the last name. He was taken to an infant. He was adopted in Montreal to a French family. It's a long story, but in any case, there's one Richards match with Y-DNA. So it's looking likely at this point that Albert was Bill's father. So months and months passed, and I was busy working on another project, and I was using Vital Records in Boston. And I came across, I don't know why I didn't think of this, but there's the Massachusetts Town Clerk at Vital Records database on Family Search. And a light bulb went off in my head. And I realized that I'd never looked at that collection for Bill. I'd only contacted the city. And then once they turned me down, I kind of closed off. So what if that record was online? So I had a peek. Back into the rabbit hole I went. And look at this. Looks familiar, doesn't it? But this is the birth record. The amended birth record is actually online. It's supposed to be restricted, but nobody was watching, and they put it online. And here it is. And check this out. Lo and behold, we've got it. And if you look at it, you can see William Malachi is written into the blank name. Murphy is crossed out. Richards is added. This says adopt in the outside column. And Albert W. is named as the father. Marion Murphy is changed to Mary A. Murphy. And we get an address for the couple. And we find out that he was a laundry foreman and he was from Boston. So it confirms the hypothesis, and we have the original record, despite the fact that it's amended and we're not supposed to be able to look at it. So that's pretty exciting. And that is the end of my story. So remember that if you're told no in getting a record, ask again and ask somewhere else. The City of Boston archivist was guarding the front door, and the back door was wide open, and I walked in. Now I will always look for a back door. So let's open this up for questions. We're almost out of time, but in summary, we put together a proof argument that William and Baby Murphy and Malachi Murphy were all the same individual, and that my uncle was indeed born out of wedlock, and my grandmother had a big secret. And DNA suggests that William is the biological son of Albert. So let's open it up and ask me any questions. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing so I can see your faces a little bit better. Whew. Wow. So please unmute and put your cameras on. Susan has a raised hand, and while you're asking your question, I'm going to dig out the handout for you. Anyone? There's no such thing as a dumb question. Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm gonna go to the chat. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna get you the handout though. Presentations me. Okay, no, I'm muttering to myself here. Okay, handout PDF. Here we go. There is the handout. So grab it, and my email address is the same as my name at gmail.com. Thank you. Oh, thank you, everyone. And we've got some questions. I'm scrolling wildly here. All right. Didn't get the doc. Hopefully you have it now. Okay, I got a whole bunch of new messages here. Thank you. It is a full-time job, Judy. I mean, this is due diligence, and sometimes this is the amount of work we have to do, and you have to ask yourself, is it worth it? And do I want to do this? But this was my grandmother, and you don't know how strict she was. She was a lovely lady, but ironically, her son married out of the Catholic Church, and she was very upset about that, which is kind of funny when you see when you hear about what happened with her. Questions, anyone? Comments, any interesting things you've discovered in your own family histories? All families have secrets. Yep, lots of stories to cover up adopted babies and preemies that arrived too. Yeah, and it was just such a stigma for people. Oh, is it possible that Albert was overseas in World War I? Oh, Judy, you're a kind soul. Albert didn't have a good rep, let me tell you. My grandparents eventually separated. He was a an alcoholic. I never met him, even though he died when I was 3. Interestingly enough, he died in Orange, Massachusetts, where the Richots, who you remember the Y-DNA match, who his family eventually anglicized the name to Richards and came down to Orange, Massachusetts, where my grandfather went and died. So it's really interesting. Oh, what are the details about the baby boy kidnapped and then raised by the French couple? Oh, it's crazy. I haven't been able to prove the line yet. I spent a year on that project when I took a class at the University of Washington. Oh, so some people aren't seeing the handout. I'm going to put it out there again. Right there. It's right there in the chat. Look for the little Adobe symbol, Smith piecing it together. So the full story of during an Indian raid in the 1680s in Berwick, Maine, a child was kidnapped and the father was killed, and the child ended up in an orphanage in Montreal, and he was adopted by a French family, and he ended up marrying one of the daughters. It's kind of crazy, and anybody named Richotte is a DNA match to my cousin, so it's a crazy story, and a fascinating one too, and sometime I'm going to learn French and work on that more. Okay, well, you have my email, so if you have any questions after the fact, feel free to get in touch.
And Claire, thank you so much too.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening, everyone.